What if I told you the kindest person you know could be the most dangerous? The empath, someone who feels everything deeply, holds a secret power most people don't see coming. People think being soft means being weak, but sometimes it's the calmest waters that hide the fiercest storms. An empath's heart can only take so much before it changes. Imagine carrying not just your own pain, but the pain of everyone around you. The silent cruelty, the manipulation, the endless demands. For years, the empath absorbs it all, believing love means sacrifice. But then comes the moment when the empath wakes up. They stop being the quiet victim and become something else entirely, a force of nature that no one expects. This transformation isn't easy. It's like fire rising from ashes. The empath stops hiding their anger, their truth, and their strength. They stop playing the victim and start rewriting the rules. I've seen this happen over and over. People who once whispered in fear now speak with the power of 1,000 voices. They see through lies, masks, and manipulation. They no longer bend to the will of narcissists or predators. Instead, they stand tall, fierce, and clear. What the narcissist doesn't understand is that the empath's gentleness is not weakness. It has a radar tuned to the truth. When pushed too far, the empath's sensitivity turns into a blade sharper than any weapon. At this point, the empath no longer tries to fix the unfixable or heal the unhealable. They reclaim their light, turning years of poisoned guilt, perfectionism, emotional abuse into wisdom and strength. True love doesn't demand sacrifice until you disappear. True forgiveness isn't about staying trapped. The empath who has had enough doesn't lose control, they gain clarity. They see the narcissist for what they really are, a scared, empty soul hiding behind a mask of charm and cruelty. And in that moment, the empath stops absorbing pain. They stop playing the part of the gentle lamb and instead rise as a warrior, a healer, and a force to be reckoned with. The narcissist's tricks don't work anymore. They can't control or confuse someone who refuses to be a pawn in their game. The empath walks away from the battlefield, refusing to fight on anyone else's terms. This is the power of an awakened empath. The narcissist thrives on control. They feed on confusion and doubt. They point fingers and call the empath weak, oversensitive, or crazy because they can't face their own shadows. For a while, the empath might believe these lies. They question their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own sanity. But then something shifts. The empath starts to see those accusations for what they really are: mirrors of the narcissist's inner battles. They realize they don't have to fight the narcissist's war anymore. Their power isn't in anger or revenge, but in refusing to play the game at all. In dreams and stories, this moment looks like an encounter with a wild beast or dark figure. The empath who once ran from conflict stands their ground. They look into the eyes of the thing they feared most, their own shadow, and say, "I'm not afraid anymore." This is the true moment of power. The angry, hurt, and rejected parts of the empath become allies. The shadow, once hidden and frightening, becomes a source of strength, self-respect, and clear boundaries. From this place, the empath becomes both healer and warrior, compassionate but unbreakable. They stop absorbing every wound like a sponge and start shining their own fierce light. This light exposes lies, breaks through manipulation, and forces everyone around them to face their own darkness. That's why the narcissist fears the awakened empath more than anything else. Not because the empath gets cruel or vengeful. No, the real danger is clarity. The empath sees through every mask, every trick, and every fake apology. They don't get caught in emotional traps anymore. And when the empath steps out of the web of confusion, the narcissist loses control. Their games fail because the empath no longer reacts. They don't try to fix or explain. They just stand firm, and that quiet strength is terrifying. The empath's journey is not just personal, it's deeply spiritual. It's about becoming whole by bringing light to every dark corner inside themselves. This process is called individuation. It means facing not just your wounds, but your own power. Power isn't bad when it's real and honest. It's the strength to say no, to protect yourself, and to live your truth. When empaths claim this power, they don't become like narcissists. They don't want to control others. They simply become sovereign over their own lives. Imagine a person wandering lost in a maze of other people's emotions for years. Then one day, they find the center of their own being, their true self. This is both scary and freeing. It shows you every mask you've worn, every lie you've told yourself, and every way you've betrayed your own soul for peace. But once you meet this truth, you can't be fooled again. You become untouchable, not because you're invincible, but because you're real. Authenticity is the greatest power. The empath's breaking point is not a loud, chaotic explosion like the narcissist expects. It's quiet. It's deliberate. It's a moment of clarity that feels almost surgical, precise, and irreversible. When an empath finally sees through the narcissist's illusions, there's no going back. They stop explaining themselves. They stop defending themselves. They stop seeking understanding. The empath realizes that the narcissist was never confused. They always knew what they were doing. And here's where the shift becomes dangerous for the narcissist. The empath begins to see patterns. They start connecting the dots between every manipulation, every guilt trip, every subtle twist of reality. They begin to understand that the entire relationship was never built on love. It was built on control. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For the empath, this moment of awakening is the turning point. They make the unconscious conscious. They see the narcissist's tactics for what they truly are. Not love, not care, but a carefully engineered power dynamic. And when the empath withdraws their emotional supply, the narcissist feels something they can't stand: insignificance. It's not anger that destroys the narcissist. It's indifference. The empath doesn't fight to win anymore. They stop playing the game entirely. They cut the invisible strings the narcissist used to pull them in and push them away. They reclaim their energy, their voice, and most importantly, their boundaries. The narcissist, who once fed off their compassion, now faces a version of the empath they never imagined. Someone calm, self-assured, and unreachable. Someone who no longer reacts, no longer defends, and no longer explains. Because a fed-up empath has already mourned the relationship. They've already felt the loss. And now they're free. You see, Carl Jung often spoke about what he called the shadow, the part of ourselves we suppress, deny, or hide away because it doesn't fit the image we want to present to the world. For an empath, that shadow is often full of unexpressed anger, boundaries never set, truths never spoken. It is not that the empath doesn't have a darker side. It is that they've been taught their whole life to bury it in order to keep the peace. But peace without honesty is just a slow burning war. And when that inner shadow starts to stir, when an empath finally lets themselves feel the rage they've swallowed for years, something shifts that even the narcissist cannot control. Jung believed that integrating the shadow, facing it, embracing it, is essential for personal wholeness. And when the empath does this, they stop being predictable. They stop absorbing the narcissist's poison like a sponge, and instead, they turn into a mirror that reflects every manipulative tactic back onto the manipulator. That's terrifying for the narcissist, because for the first time, they are forced to see themselves without the comforting filter of control. This is when the empath's silence becomes dangerous. Not because they're retreating in weakness, but because they're planning. They're observing with clarity, no longer tangled in the narcissist's illusions. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." A fed-up empath makes the unconscious conscious, both in themselves and in the narcissist, and that changes the entire dynamic. And here's the thing. Once that switch is flipped, there is no going back. The empath doesn't want revenge for the sake of cruelty. They want freedom. But freedom for an empath means truth. And truth is something the narcissist has spent their entire life running from. When an empath finally reaches that breaking point, something profound shifts inside them. Carl Jung would describe it as the moment when the persona, the mask they've worn to protect themselves and keep the peace, shatters, revealing the raw, unfiltered self beneath. This is not the quiet, endlessly patient person the narcissist thought they had control over. This is someone whose shadow, long suppressed in the name of harmony, is now awake and unafraid to act. Jung believed that true transformation often comes through confrontation with the shadow. And for the empath, that confrontation begins the moment they stop making excuses for the narcissist's behavior. It's the day they stop thinking, maybe they didn't mean it, and start thinking, I know exactly what they meant, and I'm not tolerating it anymore. To the narcissist, this sudden change feels like betrayal. But in truth, it's liberation. The empath is no longer trapped in the manipulative cycle of love bombing, gaslighting, and silent treatments. They start reclaiming their voice, speaking with a clarity and directness that cuts through the narcissist's web of deception. And that clarity is terrifying to someone who relies on confusion and emotional fog to maintain power. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For the empath, the moment of awakening is the moment they stop accepting pain as fate and start rewriting their own story. The narcissist suddenly realizes they're not facing the same pliable, forgiving target. They're facing someone who has seen the truth, and there's nothing more dangerous to manipulation than truth itself. And this is where Carl Jung's shadow work becomes more than theory. It becomes a weapon. Because once the empath recognizes that the narcissist is nothing more than an unhealed wound walking in human form, their entire illusion crumbles. The empath no longer sees the charm, the grandiosity, or the intimidation. They see the frightened child underneath. And that changes everything. Jung warned that when you make the darkness conscious, it loses its power to manipulate you. For the empath, this means the hooks no longer work. The guilt trips bounce off like raindrops, and the old triggers stop firing. The narcissist can push every button they know, but the empath has rewired the entire control panel. This shift terrifies the narcissist more than any confrontation ever could. They realize, often too late, that the empath they fed on has not only broken free, but now stands with the clarity and strength of someone who has embraced their own shadow. Jung called this integration, the moment when your light and your darkness unite into unshakable authenticity. And here's the dangerous part. A healed empath no longer fears losing the narcissist. In fact, they've already let go. That detachment, that emotional neutrality, is like a mirror the narcissist cannot bear to face. It reflects back everything they've been running from, and there is no escape. Because in Jung's world, the shadow will always demand to be seen. And when the empath forces it into the light, the narcissist finally sees the truth they've spent a lifetime avoiding. And it's devastating. The longer I stayed in this strange mental space, the more I understood what Jung meant when he said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. I realized that the discomfort I felt wasn't a flaw in me. It was a guide, pointing directly to the places I had refused to explore. These dark corners of my psyche were holding the keys to my relationships, my fears, and even my purpose. It was unsettling, because the moment I stopped resisting and actually sat with those shadow parts, they began to speak in ways I couldn't ignore. Old memories resurfaced, moments where I had felt powerless, ashamed, or deeply insecure, and yet within them there was an unexpected strength. Jung would call this integration the process of bringing unconscious material into the light so it stops controlling us from the shadows. I started to see patterns. The people I was drawn to, the conflicts I kept finding myself in, the emotions that always seemed to rise at the worst possible times, they weren't random. They were the shadow's way of trying to be acknowledged. And every time I denied them, they found a new way to push themselves to the surface. The truth was, I had been running from myself for years, thinking I was chasing freedom, when all along, the real freedom was in turning around and facing what I feared the most.